Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of r/MaliciousCompliance. My name's Ryan, the official host here on Reddit Voice, and I look forward to bringing you guys today's top stories. Before I do, I'd really appreciate it though if you could hit that subscribe button, as well as make sure you got notifications turned on, that way you could stay up to date with all the latest and the greatest. Karen the Sergeant. So, this story takes place sometime after the Kramer and Kevin the Soldier. With the exception of a few key players, this story is unrelated, but it still took place at Fort Hood. Yes, the famous Fort Hood. It's now 2008, and I've been assigned to be the armorer for our brigade's HHC unit. HHC stands for Headquarters and Headquarters Company. Basically, it's the platoon that runs the regular day-to-day stuff as troop management, ordering new supplies, or stuff of a various nature, and of course equipment management. At least that's how I saw it. As an armorer, I basically look after the various weapons and sensitive equipment an army unit might have. I'd been working at this unit for a few months and quickly acclimated. We had an awesome command team, amazing sergeants, and a few of the troops were all pretty amazing at their duties. I was one of the only lower enlisted MPs in the unit due to my arms room schooling, but in general, it was not that big of a deal to see a specialist in charge of a section quite literally worth a couple $100,000 to $1 million in equipment. It took me a while, but I had built up a decent standing with several of the higher-ups through a positive work ethic and my get-it-done mentality. As for my fellow lower enlisted, well, back then I was a bit of a partier and was more or less welcomed with open arms. I had a good couple of months there before she walked in. For the sake of the story, I'll not refer to her by my special nickname. Instead, she'll simply be called Karen. You'll learn why in just a bit. Now, Karen was originally from Brazil and spoke with a very strong accent, which was kind of endearing. She also recently reclassed, and was originally a forklift operator, but the promotion points for that MOS were too high, so she transferred to supply. Initially, she came off as intelligent, yet friendly. I had even formed what I thought was a strong friendship at this point. Before she was promoted, we'd regularly hang out after hours. We'd go to lunch, get groceries, study for boards, and even have the occasional movie night. Through all of this, I had slowly developed a crush on her, but I'll admit she intimidated me professionally, and I believed she was out of my league. Probably a good thing with what eventually happened. So after she routinely won several Soldier of the Month boards, winning over everyone in the process, she was sent to a promotion board. As usual, she wowed everyone with her knowledge. It was later announced that she won the board, and we went out to celebrate that night with dinner and clubbing. A month or so later, she was promoted to sergeant and was made the NCOIC of our supply office. Basically, she was manager. Initially, things were good. She didn't overstep her bounds and remained professional all round. Then she started sticking her feet in the pool. It started small, first getting on another soldier for not doing his best at PT. To be fair, the guy was known to weasel his way out of PT, so Sergeant didn't see an issue with Karen making him run an extra mile. Also, the guy was a bit of a creeper to most of the females in and around our bridge, including Karen. I'm assuming she wanted some light payback. She then started outright abusing her authority. Anyone lower ranking than her, she'd speak to in a condescending attitude, even going so far to pepper in her dictation with various insults. When soldiers outside of her office brought this up to chains of command, they were initially ignored since she was fairly well liked around our company, and they simply couldn't believe these rumors. Eventually, my old buddy JB, as well as another sergeant who I'll refer to as Uncle Sam, were brought in from my old line unit. Despite JB's misgivings from the Kramer saga, he was actually one of the single most competent supply clerks I've ever met. He really knew his stuff. Same with good old Uncle Sam. He was one of the best NBC guys, nuclear, biological, chemical, in the brigade as a whole. But with JB's reputation outside of those that knew him, he wasn't well thought of in a lot of remarks. Of course, Karen was aware of this and took full advantage. Every time JB would try to instruct her on how to do some important paperwork, Karen would just order him to do it. Her usual excuse was, "Because I'm the sergeant, that's why." So JB got stuck doing all the dirty work and Karen got all the credit. Of course, Karen got praise for her work ethic and professionalism outside of the HHC, But everyone slowly learned that Karen wasn't as up to snuff as she made herself out to be, yet her arrogance continued to grow. During all of this, Karen had formed a relationship with another female in the unit. She was the command sergeant major's driver, so for this story, I'll refer to her as Wheels. I don't have a problem with LGBT. I even experimented at one point. But being gay in the military was a huge no-no back then, and subject to separation under the Uniformed Code of Military Justice. Basically, don't ask, don't tell. Wheels had a lot of bad luck with relationships. I won't go into details and simply stated that she sure knew how to pick 'em. Her relationship with Karen was no different. Out in the open, they'd regularly flirt for all to see, even in front of senior leadership. But behind closed doors, they were super toxic for each other. Our company leadership was pretty lenient. We all knew who was with who, and more or less, everyone respected the don't ask, don't tell orders. Or if you could pull your own weight without letting personal drama get involved, no one cared. Of course, Karen openly flaunted this. Her ego had began to grow. Around this time, I'd become a regular target of hers. As I was the armorer, I technically fell under her, and after me and her had a disagreement over how she'd been treating people, she began to treat me rather harshly. I began to receive write-ups for the littlest things. Examples include multiple write-ups for not shaving, usually right after I'd had a 24-hour shift and no access to a razor, getting written up for having a dirty uniform after I'd been working under a truck for Motor Pool Monday, being drunk on duty. This was Saturday morning, but she tried to write it in such a way that it made it sound like we had official business going on. Those were just a few examples, and after a while, my counseling packet started to look like the leather-bound edition of War and Peace. Anytime anyone asked about me, my work ethic was slammed and I was made out to be a lazy oaf. Even sergeants who'd previously worked with me began to believe Karen's stories, but there were a few who had my back. It wasn't long before Karen began to overreach her limits. Uncle Sam began to feel her wrath as she began to try and badmouth him, but his seniority and reputation around the brigade as a whole kept him afloat. Eventually, it got so bad that he refused to work with her and put in a complaint with our first sergeant and commander. Our first sergeant, whom I dubbed the Shield, I talked about him before, didn't want any infighting with his company and more or less told him to play nice. She then started butting heads with another NCO, our chaplain's assistant, who was a whole rank above her. The chaplain's assistant, who I'll refer to as the Paladin, had become a close friend of mine after I'd started to seek counseling with him and our chaplain. He was originally an infantryman with 2 hours under his belt, and the chaplain was formerly Special Forces, believe it or not. Also would just like to say 2 tours, misread that as hours. Both of them were the 2 calmest people I'd ever met, but at the same time, they were the last 2 you'd want to mess with professionally and privately. They were 2 of my biggest supporters back then outside of JB and Mamasaurus. The other 2 became a surrogate family to a lot of us, even bringing us home-cooked meals on occasion. During one of my sessions with the chaplain, Karen came barging into the main office. She began to demand the chaplain release me so I could stop wasting her time. Her and the Paladin began to have an increasingly loud dispute over this, which ended with the Paladin telling Karen she could either leave his office through the door or through the window in the next 10 seconds. Karen ran off to the Shield to report the threat. The Paladin and Chaplain each stated their side of the events, and Karen was verbally reprimanded. After the reprimanding, Karen counseled me for wasting her time and tried to bar me from the Chaplain's office, but again was reprimanded. These were the first negative remarks Karen had ever received in her career up to this point, and they did not sit well with her. This is the part where malicious compliance came in. While collecting my keys one day, Karen asked to take a look at some of the paperwork. I really didn't think anything of it and opened my arms room for business. When she returned the paperwork, I took a look at it and noticed that it was missing several important stamps. Upon further investigation, I found that her name had been added to all of the important paperwork. You see, when you work in an arms room, you need, at the minimum, several levels of security clearance, as well as company orders and a bunch of other important paperwork. When I asked her about it, she said, "It's none of your business." She had forged government documents. When I further informed her of the trouble she could get in, I was further told, "You're not the NCO, I am. Now get back to work." So that's what I did. After about a month and a half, I was on leave and home in Washington State for my little brother's wedding. About 3 days into my leave, I had received a text message from the platoon sergeant, who I'll refer to as Big Sis, stating not to give Karen my PIN. I didn't think anything of it at first. Then I received a very angry call from Karen that went roughly like this. Hello?
Is that how you answer the phone when I call?
Sorry, Sergeant. How can I help you?
I need the PIN code to the arms room.
I can't give that to you. It's against federal regulations.
Then you need to come back ASAP.
That's not gonna happen either.
Then I'll have your rank.
She then hung up on me. Having an idea of what happened, I called Big Sis and asked her what happened. Stifling a giggle, Big Sis told me she'd tell me when I got back and to just enjoy my vacation. I proceeded to receive 3 more phone calls from Karen, each more threatening than the last. I returned 13 days after the call and got an earful from both Big Sis and the Paladin. Apparently, while I was on leave, the Shield wanted to get some serious weapon cleaning done, and had Karen open up the arms room. Since she didn't have the pin for the alarm, the MPs were notified. They asked her for the paperwork, and she provided the documentation she had rewritten. They quickly pointed out all of the issues I had pointed out almost 2 months earlier. Then she got reamed by the Shield and tried to pass the blame on me for not informing her of the issues. The Shield informed her that this was all on her. Despite the seriousness of all this, she had only received a negative counseling. This was her first official one. In her mind, it was all my fault. After I got back, she doubled down her efforts to ruin my career and what little reputation I had left, but what she got was what she deserved in the end. I'll share that in a later post. TLDR, arrogant sergeant forged important government paperwork and gets caught. My first job was a lesson in work to rule, a very obedient payback. I got hired onto my first job when I was 17. It was something of a fast food coffee shop blend, and in my region there are more of these chains than there are Starbucks. After about a 10-minute interview and some paperwork, I was hired on. I'd later find out that minors are the preferred hires at this location, since it was likely their first job and they might in turn be unfamiliar with labor laws. My mother makes a decent income going to work sites and dealing with on-site injuries, labor rights infractions, and so on. Her job is to make workplaces safer and spare them potential lawsuits. Through the stories she shared in the online handbook I devoured at Labor Rights in my region, I had a decent picture of how ethical workplaces operate. As it turns out, my new workplace was not so ethical. Your breaks were considered more of a privilege than a right, and you could be pulled out of your break to help at any time, with no opportunity to make up that break time later. I earned a great deal of scorn from my manager by asking for a 30 on my 7-hour shift instead of a 15-minute one here. You are legally entitled to 30 minutes for every 5 hours worked. There were so many weird, corner-cutting things going on that could create a disaster scenario in terms of safety. Climbing on whatever's available instead of using the ladder. The ladder was broken. Poor food safety, and the occasional fire in the toaster oven, because new hires aren't instructed on how to use it safely. Not much instruction on how to use the corrosive cleaner, and if you have to clean the oven in the black kitchen, you were lucky if you received an unused mask or a PPE that wasn't damaged. Burns, rashes, sprained ankles, and cuts were not uncommon. I badly burned my arm with hot coffee and immediately went to treat it, then asked for the right forms to fill out to report my injury. I was scolded for leaving the front end, and there were no forms, and informed that no one reports on burns. Anyway, if we reported any burn or slip or fall in a coffee shop, we'd never get through all the paperwork. The burn blistered with time and eventually required some prescription antibiotic cream from my physician. I was fed up, but intimidated at the thought of trying to formally report these people for safety and labor violations. Everyone else seemed to accept what was going on. I was trying to save money to move out, and in my head, the odds of getting hired elsewhere seemed slim. I decided to do something unconventional. I thought I was the first to come up with it at the time, but I would later find out that my plan was a classic workers' protest tactic. I was going to work to rule, follow every policy to the exact letter, which would inevitably slow things down and create obstacles to efficiency. It started with the cappuccino machine and the ice drink machine. The cappuccino machine is to be cleaned once daily, and the ice drink machine is to be changed weekly. These are both lengthy processes that leave the machines out of commission for a while. No one did it regularly, and we had an issue in the past where we got complaints about the taste of the iced drinks, only to pop the top off the machine and discover some kind of filmy, moldy growth on the surface. Seemed like a good place to start. I took great cares to drain them and give the detachable parts a long soak and thorough scrub. This angered customers who wanted their drinks right away. I'd been there for a while at this point and instructed anyone I trained not to hesitate to get the manager if their customer has an issue they can't resolve. And so it went that every shift involved me cleaning some machine and my manager placating impatient customers. We had this pre-prepared specialty tea that almost never got ordered, but nonetheless, it was policy to change the pot of tea every 30 minutes for freshness. No one did this, and this tea would sit for hours. I decided this tea needed special attention, and made sure I was changing it regularly. The result that we went through our stock faster than we ever had before, and we frequently ran out. Then the stock orders had to be changed just to accommodate a greater supply of the tea. It took cares to check our freshness dates on the prepackaged foods. If it was expired, it was trash. This pained me, as I don't like to waste food, but we had a strict policy on freshness of products. I tried to wiggle on this, only throwing it out if it was over 3 days. Nonetheless, the result was an empty display case with low stock and a need to again adjust stock to accommodate for the food supply needs that come into play when policy's actually being followed. I was assigned the sandwich and soup station, perhaps in an effort to keep me away from other things. However, it was a wonderful new territory to work to rule. I changed gloves after every order, as the handbook indicated we should. I took cares to clean out all the receptacles before putting new toppings in them. The handbook indicated we were supposed to cool vats of soup in ice baths to bring them to a safe temperature before storing them in the fridge. I made sure it was done, which was inconvenient to management when they could have had me working on something else before the shift was over. I kept abiding by the rules rigidly and to their fullest extent. Management was incredibly pissed off and communicated as much as it when I wasn't around. However, I had turned 18 by this point, and I could now legally work past a certain time, supervise the teenage employees, and close the store. Until they hired someone else who could work the hours I was working, it was something of a pickle for them. I also offered no hostility or indication I was being spiteful. If you were on the outside looking in, you might see me as an employee who did the jobs no one else wanted to do. It wouldn't have been easy to call me out to higher-ups. My coworkers, despite the inconveniences by proxy probably had to put up with, didn't seem to mind. They were interested to see how it would play out, and told me as much. I decided to quit after a conversation with the store owner herself. She indicated that she wasn't fond of kids who think they know how to run a business she's been running for years, and had some other choice words for me. I told her on the spot, "I understand completely. I'll submit my written notice for you tomorrow." My resignation letter wasn't just a resignation letter. The first few lines were as much. What followed was a list of safety infractions and labor law violations with dates and examples attached. It was incomplete since I had only started recording these a few months in, yet it managed to be pretty extensive. I said something along the lines of, "I trust you'll address these problems in a timely manner." There was a quiet implication in some of my other language that the Better Business Bureau, Health Inspector, and associated safety organizations in my region would be happy to help them out. I gave 2 weeks' notice in the interest of my coworkers who would have had to take extra shifts if I left too abruptly. I was scheduled for 5 of the 14 days. They wanted me out, and they wanted me out as soon as they could get me out. I didn't return to this location for several months, even though I lived fairly close to it. I eventually got curious and went back to check things out. The place looked very different. You walked in and it just felt cleaner. The employees looked happier, and though I didn't see any familiar faces, the location had come under new ownership and had been completely turned around. I have no idea if I played a role in the store changing hands or it getting fixed up. I only know that for several months, I was a relentless pain in the ass for quietly, obediently following the rules, and I left a letter in my wake that created unease. TLDR, my first job was at a coffee shop with major safety and labor law violations. I decided to follow all the rules to the exact letter, chaos ensued, and I quit with a letter indicating the laws they broke. Store ends up with completely new ownership and ultimately better, though I don't know if I had anything to do with it. And there you have it, folks, the end of the epics. If you like this story, be sure to leave a like on the video as well as subscribe with notifications turned on so you could stay up to date with all the latest and greatest. As always, my name's Ryan, the official host here on Reddit Voice, and I look forward to seeing you guys in tomorrow's video.